Tēnā koutou katoa and welcome everyone. My name's Paul Blair. I'm the CEO of Infrastructure New Zealand, and really warm welcome to all of you. 290 of you are joining us live today on this webinar. And what we're here to talk to you about today is some of the lessons out of rapid deployment models, in particular what we've learned out of Christchurch and Kaikōura and our responses to those natural disasters. So first, I'd like to introduce you to our panel of industry experts that we have helping us out today. So we have Rod Cameron. Rod is an industry expert who was the value manager in the SCIRT Alliance. He was also responsible for the learning legacy. So if you were to look online, you'll see over 80 pieces of learnings that have come out of the SCIRT Alliance, which is a really valuable resource as we're looking to how that might help us here. We've got Duncan Gibb. Duncan was the Executive General Manager leading the SCIRT Alliance from 2011 to 2015. He's currently the CEO of Fulton Hogan Construction in Australia. He had an establishment role as well with the Kaikōura Alliance. We've also got Karen Mitchell joining us. Karen is the Managing Principal of Advisian, but she's also seconded with the Infrastructure Commission to be their representative on the Construction Sector Accord. And as part of that, Karen, also from her personal history with a number of different rapid deployment models, is going to be able to talk to us around about what the Construction Sector Accord has been looking at as far as rapid deployment models goes. So a warm welcome to everyone and thanks for attending. What we're going to do now is just show you the agenda of how we're going to walk through the presentation today. So we'll start quickly with a couple of live polls. That'll give us a straw man for how you're feeling and what levels of understanding you have around the types of rapid deployment models we'll be talking about today. And then we'll go into some really quick, snappy presentations from Duncan, from Rod, and from Karen. So this will come from three different perspectives, and hopefully that'll start the conversation from you. As I said, there's 290 of you, and we'll be taking your questions and answers all the way through. I suppose the high level, if we look at the next slide, is that the North Canterbury Alliance was all about moving mountains to connect communities. So post the Kaikōura event, this was all about re-establishing the rail link and also the road link, Highway 1. And what it actually managed to do in moving mountains was a year, a month, and a day later, it re-established links with those communities. So another rapid deployment model, $1.2 billion worth of work, which is fantastic. SCIRT, we'll hear a lot more about this on the way through. So this was post the Christchurch earthquake. It was $2.2 billion worth of spend on over 700 projects in a broad program. So this is probably one of our largest alliances. Both NICTA and SCIRT were multi-award winning domestically and internationally. So the focus we have got today is these physical events. How can we take the learnings from those physical events for what we've got now, our pandemic, and rapidly deploy? So in terms of today, it will be a rapid pass through. We will have 45 minutes here. We will try and get through as many questions as we can, and then finish up at 12:45. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Zoom by now, but you'll have the ability to use the question and answer function. The chat function is not available, but please put your question and answers up there, and those will be surfaced through to me and to the panelists. We are recording this now, and you'll receive a copy of this sent to you later today to watch again if you need to. But also we're recording live on YouTube, and that'll be available as a link if you want to share it with colleagues. Finally, Infrastructure New Zealand has had almost 4,000 of you join either a webinar or a recording of our webinar to sort of get these market insights from our panelists and from ministers. If you're not already a member with us and you'd like to join this wider community, then please get in touch with me. All of our contact details are on our website. So finally, I want to lead into a couple of very quick polls, and these are designed to give us a sense of how much you know about the NICTA and SCIRT alliances at this stage. And also, because we've just gone, well, here's the poll now. So please take your time to put your answers in there. Got a really nifty gadget that I haven't seen for the first time, so I can see you all voting here, all 169 of you that are on there. Give it another couple of seconds, and I think we can probably close that off there, Sally, and show those results to the team. So what I'm seeing here is that we've got a little bit of familiarity. About 50% of you have got a little bit of familiarity. We've got almost 25% of you are experts, and then about a quarter of you who are learning, as I am. So this is going to be a great opportunity for the panel to respond to that. And now I'd just like to run through quickly the second poll that we've got. So we're obviously delighted, as I know a number of the industry are, to be getting back to work this week. And so we've just got a question here about, has your feeling about the future of the infrastructure industry changed? How are you feeling at the moment? There's obviously a lot of emergency restart things that we hope are going to come out of the May budget. And you'll also have seen that Infrastructure New Zealand is talking about the concern that a lot of you have, which is that we make sure that we invest for the future and that we rapidly look at what I suppose the third horizon or the new New Zealand might look like. So I think we've got about 3/4 of you that have voted on that so far, and it's a fairly overwhelming answer there, Sally, so we can probably look to close that off. So almost 70% of you are cautiously optimistic, which I think when we look at that relative to other sectors is actually a fantastic result. And I know that there are differences within this, whether you're in the civil, the vertical, or the residential construction markets, or perhaps in an advisory role. But I think, again, that's a fantastic place for our industry to be in relative to some others that are going through really tough times. So thanks for your participation on that. And now what we'll do is we'll lead into introducing Duncan. So Duncan, here's a pretty picture of him, and he's going to wander through some slides. So Duncan, love to hear from you. Over to you.
Okay, I want to take a view on those programs from a program management perspective. So a program is all about doing the right thing at the right time in the right location. It's about managing a pipeline of projects. That will enable us to look at replicating success through a disciplined application of well-developed processes. Those processes are supported by robust systems and procedures, which will give us real-time reporting, which gives visibility to all levels of interested parties to make sure we make the right decisions at the right time, which all leads to benefits realisation. So it's about making sure that as we deliver each project, whether it's a piece of infrastructure or whatever it is, that we're also developing secondary and tertiary benefits in employment and training and psychosocial support, stakeholder engagement and the like. Programs are really useful when you've got, if you move to the next slide, where you've got strategic objectives that are difficult to define, where you really want to deliver value, but it's difficult to define what value means, where there's, in this situation, a time imperative where you need to act quickly, where you've got large complexity, scale, shortage of resources, and really where you're dealing with risk and a high probability of change throughout the program. So I've been involved in programs of work for the Queensland flood recovery, for Christchurch earthquake recovery, and for the Kaikōura recovery also. Those programs have got some similarities and differences, and it's worth looking at those. So each of those programs was delivered through a multiple organisational, private and public collaborative relationship. So there's people from the government, from local council, from contractors, consultants, suppliers and subbies who are delivering the outcomes. There's a huge amount of scope uncertainty in all three of those programs, really complex challenges and multiple funding sources, which does create some problems. In Australia, it was federal, state and local government that were supplying funds. In Christchurch, It was central government, local government, and NZTA, and Kaikōura was about Kiwi Rail and NZTA. So all parties wanting to get the best they can for the money they're putting in place, and that leads to issues. Differences, obviously each response is dealing with the delivery of different outcomes. In terms of Kaikōura, it was about a speed of response to enable connecting of communities and those sort of issues. There's very different commercial structures. So in Christchurch, the governance and the clients, the funders, wanted competition and collaboration in parallel. In Kaikōura, a more simple structure was needed. But you need to create your commercial model for each specific instance to deliver the outcomes you're looking for. And then in New Zealand, the stakeholder engagement issues are driven by the RMA. So in Kaikōura, we were able to circumvent a lot of the delays that come through consultation and the like by orders in council and legislation that we assisted in drafting, which enabled a stakeholder liaison group to be developed. So we brought the stakeholders along in the journey through asset assessment, design and construction, rather than needing to go out to open consultation. To make a program really important, successful, you need to have good governance. So that means your funders need to establish appropriate levels of governance authority. And I would suggest that you need to include some independent players in that mix. The governance needs to have a clear mandate and direction of where they're going and what they want to achieve. And all the parties need to be aligned and committed to success. Governance is an overview. Below that, the doing is done through a program management office with leadership that needs to be clearly empowered to deliver within the rules of engagement that they're given from governance. To get the best out of the program, you need a culture that is intentionally developed rapidly around a compelling vision that enrolls and engages everyone involved to deliver the outcomes that are defined by the clients. And ultimately, it's all driven by people. Every organisation involved needs to offer up the best people they have so that the right people can be selected on a best of program basis. And ultimately, there needs to be flexibility around how we deliver the program because things change with time. A couple of other key issues to me were around communication. Communication needs to be timely, honest, and accurate. Everyone from stakeholders through to the public need to be informed about where we're going and why. And lastly, everyone who's involved needs to set aside their personal or organisational agenda because this is nation building and it's about what's the right thing for the nation, not what's right for you or your organisation. With those issues, everything can succeed.
Well, what a fantastic summary of 5.5 years worth of work in about 4 minutes. So really appreciate that, Duncan. I think what we'll do is to give a different perspective, hopefully pretty aligned actually from Rod, but Rod, just introduce you on the next slide to come in and give your perspective. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, mine's a follow-on act to Duncan, which is not surprising because that's the role that we had in the rebuild of the pipes and roads in Christchurch. Mine was a strange role. I was independent and observer and not involved in day-to-day deployment and so on. And I appreciated it. And I was very pleased to see how the organisation grew and developed. I'm going to touch on 3 things that came out of that, diving down in a little bit more detail than Duncan. But before I do, I want to talk briefly about engage. Engage is just a concept, but it's not just a concept. As the pipe and road rebuild began to hit its stride, Duncan and I particularly, but a number of us said, actually, we've got to capture the good stuff of this. We've got to think about it, and we've got to put it somewhere in a box so it can be used later. That was the initial expression. Over the last 3 years, there's about 20 of us became focused on this, and we've worked the concept up to a point that we think that we can help. It doesn't belong to us, it belongs to the nation. Right, I now want to dive into 3 aspects. The first is that sequence that you can see in front of you. Now that's a pretty obvious sequence, you would say. Collecting the intelligence, shaping up what you want to do. But I want to draw your attention to one of the points in the middle, prioritize. It's imperative in a disaster situation, but also in the situation we're in at the moment where we want to stimulate the economy. It's important that we prioritize. Now that's not a one-off thing. That'll have to be done over and over again because the landscape changes, the political landscape, the economy will change, the money available will change. The resourcing capacity will change. And once you've prioritized a project and a series of projects, you can then get into delivery. Look how far delivery is along that decision-making line. And the bits that I'm passionate about, of course, are monitoring and the capture of lessons. Now, none of that sequence will work effectively across a number of projects. People say 700 for the rebuild of the pipes and roads. Actually, it was less than that because a lot of them didn't go ahead. But it was still over 600. Imagine over the next few years in New Zealand with the stimulus, we might be dealing with 5,000 projects. Well, what we need to deal with that is my next slide. Comprehensive information management. It's pretty obvious what it's based on, and the information that is gathered is straightforward. But there's a lot of work needed to do to figure out how to make it integrated, comprehensive, a single point of information. And the bit that I want to challenge your thinking about is visibility. It's not normal for things to be highly visible, but in recovery in particular, and in stimulus in this instance, I put it to you that all of those things about visibility need to be there. And why shouldn't they be? The ratepayers and the taxpayers are paying for this. Why shouldn't your parents and grandparents or your children and grandchildren know what's going on and who's doing what? And this is as well as the teams on the ground know how well they're doing and compared with other teams. Obviously not sharing confidential financials, but certainly sharing whether it's going to plan. There's about 20 people in the Canterbury area who know how to make this happen, and we could bring them together and create it for New Zealand. And I think it's very timely that we do it. I'll share with you later, because time's limited at the moment, a text message I've just received from the Mayor of Christchurch. But the importance of this really relates to community, and let's take me to my next slide. This is reinforcing what Duncan has described. And these are my summaries, and they're not equal balance, but it's a pretty important sequence. In order to feel better about themselves and about what's happening, people need to see activity. And then they need to see that it's going ahead in a controlled and sensible manner. And all the way through until you get to the other one of those midpoints there, openness. We have to be open and honest and clear with people about what's going on. And then the integrity that comes from that benefits everybody. Results need to be celebrated, and then you will have a community that has confidence in what's going on, and you will have recovery. You won't have recovery without what we've been describing. It's not about calling a public meeting and having everybody hold hands. We need to demonstrate. Thank you. That's all I want to say for the moment. I'll join in with the questions later.
Thanks very much, Rod. That's fantastic. And it goes to one of our core sort of themes for Infrastructure New Zealand of community-led infrastructure in order to deliver those results for people. So people at the heart of this, and also a lot of new, different behaviours, openness, transparency, and authenticity in order to deliver this well. So thanks very much for that. Now I'd like to hand over to Karen to give a perspective of what you're seeing in terms of rapid deployment and your thoughts.
Thanks, Paul. I think that Skirt and Nectar are very good examples of a call to action. I mean, clearly in response to some very specific circumstances. There are, of course, other examples of where projects or programs of work simply have to meet an immovable deadline. So we've seen examples of that in relation to the America's Cup Alliance and the Pukeahu National War Memorial Park. The COVID response is a little different. So, this is work that we're looking at as part of the construction sector accord, but it is still a call to action. One of the challenges is, of course, it's far more widespread. It's not geographically focused as such. Clearly, and as Rod and Duncan have already alluded to, a rapid mobilisation requires a collaborative mindset. So hence the industry's tendency to deploy alliance type models, and that's understandable. But we need to use this mindset to extend to a multitude of other different and possible models. Clearly, rapid mobilisation requires tolerance for uncertainty and risk. It means that you're very unlikely to have done all of the thinking at the outset. So there will be plenty of unknowns, and funders need to make decisions on less information, trusting in their delivery partners. And that clearly was evident in the examples that Rod and Duncan have talked about. Expertise for deployment is actually quite sparse. While SCIRT and NICTA were concentrated in a geographical area and were able to concentrate resource in that area, a COVID-19 response actually needs to be spread throughout the country. We need to ensure the expertise, or the right expertise, is in the right place at the right time. That's going to be challenging. We're going to have to look at some potentially quite different ways of bringing together expertise, but spreading it out at the same time. Capacity issues in industry will occur if we go hard at rapid mobilisation. In some sectors, it's likely that capacity may become available, particularly in the vertical infrastructure sector. Sadly, it may be more important to stagger projects in a region, providing much more continuity and enabling the development of the workforce over a longer period. Clearly, there are some constraints. Consenting processes don't necessarily align with rapid mobilisation and rapid response. And in some cases, legislation has been necessary. And of course, fast-track processes are already being considered. Procurement rules are often cited as a constraint. But actually what I've found is more often than not, it's the practice of procurement and certain behaviours that are in fact the constraint, rather than the rules themselves. And indeed the rules actually could be very enabling in this COVID response, particularly when it comes to looking at broader outcomes. When rapid mobilisation is discussed, what comes to mind are very large projects. Success is more likely when scale and complexity are matched with the right delivery model. That's appropriate risk allocation, strong leadership, and funding for outcomes. But there are opportunities that exist to aggregate projects into programs of work over a much longer period. Recovery would also need a focus on the smaller projects. That could include rapid mobilisation of already established contractor panels and proven contractor relationships. Really important that that opportunity is not constrained unnecessarily by particularly the procurement type hoops. Private and iwi capital and expertise could also be deployed to bring forward projects and pay intergenerationally. Where we're constrained in upfront capital, there's plenty of opportunity to consider alternative models of financing. And perhaps we should be more open to considering unsolicited proposals without having to jump through the uniqueness test. There has been mixed experience in Australia. They certainly don't necessarily mean rapid mobilisation, but you never know. Perhaps being more open is what we need to be. Enabling for broader outcomes is a key challenge. It's a key challenge is our ability to enable broader social and economic outcomes. Rapid mobilisation shouldn't preclude this, but there is a risk that in our haste, we trade off the time it takes to think and coordinate outside of individual sector-specific projects to deliver even greater gains. We've got to be very careful in rapid mobilisation that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We'll need to be quite deliberate in our intent to train and employ affected workers and engage local companies. That's very much a part of the broader outcomes framework that the government's procurement rules enable. Bringing together different agencies across central and local government and the private sector actually means addressing some of the challenges to date head on to achieve the goals of a call to action. And indeed, broader outcomes ought to be able to enable this much more effectively.
Oh, Karen, it's a fantastic challenge, and there's certainly a leadership challenge in this. When we go to deploy rapidly, we need to crash through a few barriers. So look, just going to go now to questions and answers for the team. I might turn to Rod on this one actually, but mirroring one that has come through from the audience. What is the role for politicians or elective representatives in program governance? This was commented on by the Auditor General, I suppose, in SCIRT. So love to know what you have to say about that, Rod, when you come off mute.
Thank you for the prompt. Well, lightheartedly, one would say in the delivery arena, one would say as far away from the action as possible. But of course, what we're dealing with currently is complexity because of geographic spread, but also scale and a wide variety of things and interests. And you must bring those together. We can't just have a startup that says, this is the vision, these are the objectives, go to it and leave it. And therefore, I think that something like the pipes and roads model is appropriate, which is that elected representatives or a small number of them and industry players form a governance group above the operational governance. So I'm not talking about the governance that drives the program, but I'm talking about the governance that thinks clearly about what are the priorities here, what are the funding sources, etc. And this is going to be quite complicated in New Zealand in this next few years, because in fact, there's only one ultimate source of funds. And whilst all the government departments and so on think that they should control theirs, this is, and the politicians behind those people, this is a recipe for chaos if we're not careful.
Thanks very much, Rod. And I think, again, in the spirit of openness, we need to call these things out so that we can address them. So, Duncan, I wanted to turn to you. I mean, both Kaikōura and Christchurch are obviously geographically defined, as Karen already pointed out. Could we use any of these alliance type models on a more national or sector scale, for example, in the water sector, or have you seen that occur?
Yeah. Look, my experience is that the program management principles or the principles aligned with delivering multiple projects can be covered across a large geographical area. When you look at the flood recovery projects and the area they span in Queensland in the floods, it's a massive area, 3 or 4 times the size of New Zealand. So, this can be done through, you could have a central PMO, which is managing at a higher level, and regional offices where you're delivering a number of different projects. You could split by discipline or sector, or you might want to manage it all together. I think, just going back to what Rod was saying, when you have a funding stream like you have in New Zealand, which is relatively limited, it needs to be controlled, but there needs to be system and process that actually does the controlling around some basic principles that the politicians determine. And I think that's the best way to spread the funding out and get the outcomes, the broader second, third tier outcomes that the nation needs to get out of this.
So just a follow-up question. When we were talking prior to this session, you talked about a prioritisation sort of multi-factor matrix that was used in SCIRT. You want to sort of expand on that a bit and the role of governance?
Okay. So what we did was we sat down with central and local government and NZTA, the players, and then external stakeholders. We determined from them what were the key facets that needed to be delivered in terms of, they wanted training and development, they wanted economic factors to get out to the community and spread widely. They wanted a broad usage of all the construction sector, the SMEs and the large players. So once you, and there are geographic considerations, all those sort of issues. Once you identify what they are, you then rank them in levels of importance. You put that into a multi-criteria assessment approach, and then you feed in the project data and information, and it actually prioritizes projects which you can then challenge and revisit. But what it gives you is a framework around principles that have agreed, that's based on fact and information that's real and can be trusted, which then takes away the emotional triggers and political involvement, and gives you a good structured pipeline which enables you to almost get the most out of your resources and get the most out of your funding and deliver the optimum outcome. So I can't see why you couldn't have a number of those different tools established, or even one centrally at a higher level.
Fantastic. So Karen, a question from the floor and one from me as well. COVID is again a different response, and we've talked about fitting the right model to the right response. Yep. So beyond the alliances that we've talked about in Christchurch and Kaikōura, what do you see as some different models, rapid deployment models that might be discussed or might be applicable in this situation?
I mean, in a very short space of time, really, in response and recognising the impacts, we're already seeing different agencies turn their minds to this and already rolling out their rapid mobilisation models. The Ministry of Education is doing work in this space. NZTA is looking to accelerate delivery, a large number of high value and complex projects, and a large number of small to medium-sized projects. We've seen Hamilton City's Council's Transportation Unit put together a collaborative working arrangement. Waikato Local Authority Shared Services is actually working across 12 Waikato councils to develop a program view of their procurement, which is really excellent. And obviously we've got the models of alliances around the country, like the Wynyard Edge Alliance and others. So there's plenty of minds being turned to this, actually, and where they have those levers clearly, and they have that funding, or at least their authorising environment may well be less complex, or where they in fact are a single agency, single project type. I think the complexity and of multi-agency opportunities we're not yet seeing, and I think that's something that if we're looking regionally and we're looking across sectors and across projects and building programs, we definitely need to address that challenge.
Great. And a sort of a pragmatic one here. I mean, there's obviously a lot of parts of our sectors that are really struggling sort of right here, right now. When we're talking rapid, are we talking a month, a week, a year? What are we able to get up and running in 3 months? What's your feeling?
Well, I mean, there are some, there are some projects that have just paused. So, frankly, we could get them going next week with the right direction and instruction effectively. I mean, rapid mobilisation, might mean that actually you're bringing in your consultants, your design and engineering consultants to solve some problems really quickly, and you could do that. I mean, actually getting shovels into the ground, actually has a whole range of other factors that play into that. There are projects where there are designs and consenting documentation sitting in drawers and that sort of thing. I mean, clearly there's opportunity there, but there's also projects that have done quite a lot of work and are not that far off being able to be delivered if they chose to deliver in a different way. In other words, not do as much design before they get the team on board, as it were, or do a few things in parallel. Take a few risks, run your sort of consenting processes, your consenting strategy alongside some of your design work and some of the unknowns. So, I think it's very difficult to say whether it's 1 month, 2 months, but But actually, I think this response is longer term, actually. I mean, rapid mobilisation, yes, but we're going to be talking like that for a long time, you know, possibly up to 2 years, in fact.
Yeah. And so, Rod, I wanted to come to you on that around the community aspects of this, actually. So there is some concerns when I talk to people about these rapid mobilisations sort of running roughshod over quality outcomes or the voice of the community. We want to talk about how that was managed in SCIRT and if there is a different partnership or different mindset required for that.
Thank you. Yes. Well, there is. And you have to be very cognizant of the community. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We had two major impediments to pipes and roads rebuild that happened, one from community and the other one from government. And at one stage we had $400 million worth of work on hold. And these came about because, in my mind, and I think the Auditor General's report illustrated it quite well as well, because of lack of high-level communication and openness. Things were carried out based on simple assumptions made by individuals in isolation. In the case of pressure pipes in Christchurch, there was no community consultation because it was deemed not to be necessary. And that really came back to bite SCIRT. It wasn't a SCIRT decision of that. And that's an example. So there's got to be just tentacles and antenna out there all the time assessing the community. And I pick up Sally's point earlier about the scale, Karen's point earlier about the scale, particularly relating to small scale local projects, which people align to. And there's another thing that's emerging in the community I'm seeing left, right and center, which is actually we should rethink about the importance of some of these major things. Do we need, say, a motorway? I'm not arguing one way or another than this. I'm just saying the community is starting to raise these questions. We have to listen to the community.
Absolutely.
I'd like to go back to an earlier point too, and Karen outlined that a whole lot of initiatives are happening. I have a significant concern about that because the resourcing implications aren't obvious at the moment. But when we rebuilt the pipes and roads, those contractors that were digging up the streets actually came from Northland to Southland and everywhere in between. And it's a finite resource we're dealing with here. We can't initiate a whole lot of stuff throughout the country and imagine, yep, we've got the people to do it. We won't have. We're quite a narrow resource space.
Yeah, and another discussion is about that international resource, which was quite important in Christchurch as well. We obviously have closed borders, so that is a discussion that's going on as well as how do we bring in international, particularly specialist resource if we need it, because we hope to retrain, but there are some key skills that aren't here that we will need to find a way to bring people in.
We had an office of about 300 people, and Duncan, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess would be at least 50 of those came from all around the world. We had a map where we pinned where people came from. It was amazing. We couldn't have done it with local resources or even New Zealand resources.
So look, we've got time for a couple more quick questions. Question perhaps for Karen and or Duncan, looking at it from an Australian perspective. Have you seen any rapid mobilisation models that have used alternative financing streams? I believe they mean non-government financing streams.
My experience from Australia is that whenever you've got external funding, you're talking about banks and the like, and they don't rush around handing out money very freely and very quickly. So there's a very rigid process that needs to be involved through a PPP. You might get some small scale privately funded PPPs. Maybe there's some companies that are prepared to come and replace a regional water treatment plant or sewage treatment plant and fund that themselves. But when you're talking large projects, I don't see that as rapid.
Yep.
I question okay, so rapid deployment is getting up and running. Whether or not they all need to be done in a closed period of time, I'm not sure that's really the case. No. Aren't we talking about getting an optimum outcome through forcing the spend over the broadest possible area we can to get the biggest social impact and impact the well-being of the nation and train and upskill as many people as we can. I'm not sure it's all about just let's quickly get a whole pile of money and throw it into this rebuild, but that's just.
Well, no, absolutely right. And that's a question that came from the floor actually, was did in Christchurch, did we change our time frame in order to maximise value for money? Did we? The question here was that in Queensland, they moved the program from 2 to 3 years so that they didn't overheat the market.
Yep.
Is that what's happened?
We did the same in Queensland. The duration was, to a certain extent, through the prioritisation process, extended and to optimise resource.
Yeah, fantastic. Sorry, Karen, I think I might have cut you off. Did you have something to say?
No, that's fine. I was just thinking, the assumption really in terms of rapid mobilisation is there's going to be a hole to be filled, and that, the whole of, so a whole bunch of people who have no projects or have are in sectors or in regions where there is significant downturn. Now, that's something that's going to be continuously monitored, and there's going to be quite a lot of focus on that, and there'll be clearly more and more information that comes out that we really need to look at from a construction sector perspective. Just going back to the point on alternative financing though, I mean, clearly if we're looking at unsolicited proposals and there are opportunities for build, own, operate type models, they may well be more rapidly deployed in a sense, although they still have to they still have to address the sort of consenting community and all those other aspects that that ensure success. I mean, clearly, as Duncan said, public-private partnerships, which I know very well, of course, do take a bit of time to find the right partner and get all the financing lined up. So, but having said that, I still think that this time horizon is not necessarily a month or 3 months or 6 months. I think we need to be thinking about the horizon a bit further out and in a more planned way.
Fantastic. Well, look, we've run out of time for questions, so I just wanted to wrap up what I think we've heard a little bit about. So look, from an Infrastructure New Zealand perspective, when we've gone internationally, all of the research that we've done, we think there's roughly 5 pillars that make up world-class infrastructure. The first one is that defining vision, and we talked about that in SCIRT and having a common platform. But that vision needs to be led and governed really well. The next piece is that you need an integrated plan, whether that's a long-term plan or a plan that integrates all departments, all areas of government and community and the private sector. You need to have absolute clarity of the funding and also the financing to give you the delegated authority to get going. You need to then have that enabling laws, culture and incentives in there to make sure that people are driving towards the same and aligned result. And the fifth one is all about delivery, which is, of course, all about people. It's about innovation. People are at the heart of all of this, but if we can manage to tick off those 5 areas, and I think we've talked all the way around those in terms of the features of that within these delivery models, then we can achieve world-class infrastructure, whether that's for a sector, a project, a program, or indeed for New Zealand. So we heard a bit about the need for transparency, for that open data, the information going out there. And at the heart of all of that, I think, is trust. So, there's a lot of public money that's going to go in here. The community needs to feel part of this, and not that it's done to it, but that it's done with it and for it. So that's a key piece. The Office of the Auditor General in the SCIRT case found, some really good alliance practices. They actually had really good value for money, given the uncertainty and the circumstances. And crucially, there's some wider benefits. So, there is wider benefits for the community and skills and workforce and innovation. Some of the softer things that we've not been great at taking into account when we do a classical cost-benefit ratio. And I think a critical one, which Rod and everyone's talked to, is this learning legacy of having done this in the past and having been resilient through a physical crisis. We'd love to see that we pick up these lessons and carry them forward into our response to COVID. So finally, I suppose there's an obligation to think about the construction sector accord principles and behaviours, because it is a people sport, this one. There does need to be clarity of expectations. Those governance and responsibility roles need to be good, and the Crown and councils need to be good clients, just as the private sector needs to behave extraordinarily well. So look, finally, I'd just like to wrap up and thank all 162 of you who have stuck with us through this call. In particular to Karen, to Rod, and to Duncan. Thank you for sharing your expertise. We really value the chance to get industry expertise in a time where insights and clear communication is really, really important. I wanted to thank our members on the call, and once again, I hope you're safe, well, and that you're thinking about the opportunities that come out of the ability for us to reimagine what New Zealand might be